May 7, 2026. Welcome to This Explainer. Settle in for a second. Take a breath. I want us to really just sit with the immense gravity of that date for a moment. Today, we're diving into a flashpoint where history, geography, and pure geopolitical survival violently collide. We're looking at a nation at an absolute crossroads, facing a decision that's going to irrevocably rewrite the fragile security architecture of the entire Pacific. The post-World War II order, all those alliances and sea lanes that have maintained this incredibly delicate balance for nearly 80 years, it's fracturing. The atmosphere is tense. The stakes? Existential. And to understand exactly how we arrived at this pivotal day, we have to look closely at the data, the maps, and the shifting fault lines of global power.
50,000. Now, that's not just a statistic on a page. That is a living, breathing force currently gathered outside the National Diet Building in Tokyo. Picture the sensory overwhelm of this scene for a second. The air is absolutely thick with chanting, vibrating right through the pavement. You have this massive, vibrant crowd bathed in the high-saturation electric oranges and neon blues of a modern Tokyo evening. And there is this immense, almost suffocating physical tension as this pulsing sea of humanity presses right up against the cold, static, immovable stone architecture of Japan's legislative center. It's the unstoppable force of raw public will meeting the unyielding, impenetrable object of government policy.
And what is that 50,000-strong crowd roaring? Do not touch Article 9. They are delivering a direct, unmistakable message to Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. For the first time in nearly 80 years, the Japanese government is on the absolute verge of deleting the very law that fundamentally forbids the nation from ever going to war. What we're witnessing out there in those streets is the pacifist heart of Japan fighting for its life. You see, Article 9 isn't just some legal statute. It is the foundational pillar of Japan's post-war rebirth. It's woven into the curricula of their schools, embedded deeply in the national psyche, and cherished by multiple generations who literally know nothing but peace. These citizens are desperately trying to preserve an identity that's suddenly right on the chopping block. So, the crucial question we have to ask is, why now? Why, after nearly 8 decades of steadfast pacifism, is the government willing to risk such massive domestic upheaval and tear the country apart? To answer this, we need to execute a strategic pivot. Let's transition away from the immediate, visceral street protests of Tokyo and zoom out to the broader, cold, calculating geopolitical theater. Because the true catalysts for this domestic crisis, they're actually thousands of miles away from Japanese shores. The spark was lit in the Middle East. The ongoing 2026 Middle East war has triggered a severe, paralyzing global energy crisis. And the most critical, devastating development is the complete and total closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, as a strategist, when you see a maritime choke point of this magnitude shut down, you aren't just looking at a regional conflict. You are looking at the global supply chain seizing up like an engine running without oil. Supertankers are stacking up, insurance premiums have become completely insurmountable, and international trade routes are deadlocked. For a nation that relies heavily on imported energy just to keep its massive, industrialized economy functioning, a closed strait is an immediate existential threat to national survival. 95%. Think about that. That is the sheer volume of Japan's oil that must pass through the Strait of Hormuz to reach its ports. This is a terrifying economic vulnerability. It's a geographic Achilles heel that has suddenly been struck. When you rely on a single, volatile choke point halfway across the globe for virtually all of your energy, well, your domestic pacifism is entirely reliant on foreign global stability. With the strait closed, Japan's economic lifeblood is being systematically cut off. We are talking about the imminent threat of rolling blackouts, strained power grids, and the halting of Japan's world-renowned high-tech manufacturing sector. The nation is feeling more vulnerable and exposed right now than it has at any point since the middle of the 20th century. To counter this overwhelming, suffocating vulnerability, Prime Minister Takaichi has been engaged in some incredibly rapid, high-stakes geopolitical maneuvering. She recently returned from securing vital new agreements abroad, a sweeping defense pact in Australia and an emergency energy pact in Vietnam. This is the frantic scramble for survival. The administration is desperately trying to build a new, resilient network of security and resource guarantees to insulate the island nation from the shockwaves of that Middle East war. But in the cold calculus of the current government, treaties and pacts with other nations are really only half the equation. Section 1. The Sword and Shield. The administration's calculated, unyielding argument for imminent remilitarization is that diplomacy and economic maneuvering just aren't cutting it anymore. The Japanese government is making the case that the fundamental rules of engagement must change. They view the 1947 Pacifist Constitution as an outdated relic, a document written under occupation for a post-war era that simply no longer exists. And in stark contrast to that relic stands a highly dangerous new world: close trade routes, aggressive regional labors, shifting unreliable alliances. The administration argues, formally and forcefully, that applying a 1947 framework to a 2026 survival crisis is nothing short of strategic negligence.
The core philosophy driving this push to delete the pacifist law is perfectly encapsulated in this one phrase: Japan needs a sword to match its shield. Spoken with the cold, pragmatic logic of a military strategist, the argument is brutally simple. A nation cannot survive on defense alone in an increasingly hostile environment where traditional allies might be overstretched. For 80 years, the United States security umbrella and Article 9 have acted as a shield. But in a world where global supply lines are snapping and regional powers are aggressively asserting dominance, the government insists that Japan must have its own offensive kinetic capability, its own sword, to deter imminent threats and independently secure its sovereign interests.
Section 2. Ghosts of 1945. But here's the thing: cold logic and strategic maneuvering don't always account for the soul of a nation. We must shift the narrative back to the deep, historical, and profound psychological trauma fueling the resistance we saw in Tokyo. The people on the streets aren't stubbornly arguing against the reality of the energy crisis. They are arguing against what remilitarization does to the very identity of their country. Picture again that deep, saturated red of the citizens' banners waving fiercely outside the Diet building. That vibrant red represents modern defiance. It's a desperate, passionate plea for peace. But for many in that crowd, they aren't just fighting a proposed legal change. They are physically fighting the ghosts of 1945. They are fighting the cellular memory of exactly where unchecked militarization inevitably leads. The deep red of those 2026 protest banners carries a powerful visual echo. In the minds of the people, that vibrant red morphs seamlessly into the stark red of the Hinamaru, the Japanese flag, flapping over the smoldering, grainy, black and white rubble of 1945. This throughline perfectly captures the duality of the symbol. The Hinamaru transitioned slowly and painfully from a feared emblem of imperial conquest and devastating destruction to a quiet, respected symbol of peace and economic rebirth over the last 8 decades. The protesters outside the Diet fear, with every fiber of their being, that this hard-won transition is about to be violently reversed. This juxtaposition right here is at the absolute heart of the national fracture. On one side lies the dark, devastating imperial history of Japan's past, a path of aggression that brought fire from the sky and absolute ruin to the nation and the broader region. On the other side is the modern peace sentiment and unparalleled prosperity that Article 9 has preserved. We're talking about 80 years of bullet trains, global technological dominance, and immense soft power. And it was all built on the foundational promise of never again spending blood and treasure on war. For the 50,000 people outside the Diet, Article 9 is the only definitive legal barrier standing between the modern, peaceful Japan they love and the horrific militaristic abyss of the past.
Section 3. The Senkaku Flashpoints.
Now watch how this abstract historical tension meets acute modern friction on a tactical map. That red sun from the flag of 1945 shrinks and sharpens, transforming into a blinking, glowing red tactical dot right over the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea. This tiny, uninhabited cluster of islands represents a massive geopolitical fault line. It's a constant, glowing ember in the waters south of Japan that threatens, on a daily basis, to ignite a much larger, uncontrollable regional conflict. This is exactly where the philosophical debate over pacifism hits the cold, hard water of tactical reality. The geography itself is unchanging, right? These remote islands have always been there, just sitting quietly in the ocean. But the strategic environment surrounding them has shifted drastically and aggressively. In 2026, Chinese Coast Guard and naval vessels maintain a daily, highly assertive presence in these waters, utilizing gray zone tactics to constantly test boundaries. This relentless, suffocating pressure has pushed Japan's willingness to defend its sovereign territory with actual kinetic force to an absolute breaking point. It's real-world escalating scenarios exactly like this that the Takaichi administration points to when demanding the deletion of Article 9. They argue, quite simply, you cannot deter a warship with a philosophy. Section 4. A soul in the balance. The energy desperation from the Middle East, the closed Strait of Hormuz, the daily maritime incursions at the Senkaku Islands, and those heavy, breathing ghosts of the 1945 empire, they are all converging on this single defining moment. Because the reality is this: the Takaichi administration is officially, unequivocally pushing for a national referendum to delete Article 9. They are forcing the issue, asking the Japanese public to formally, legally vote away their pacifist shield. And as this political push intensifies, the country is violently, ideologically split down the middle. It's a massive, structural collision of grim geopolitical necessity and deep-seated moral identity. The map is ready, but the people are not. I mean, that just beautifully distills the profound disconnect currently tearing at the seams of Japanese society. The bureaucrats and military strategists in Kasumigaseki see the shifting global board. They've drawn up the tactical plans, forged the new security alliances, and prepared the schematics for a new, assertive Japan. Their map is ready. But the citizens, the very people who actually have to bear the moral weight and physical cost of that profound change, they're screaming in resistance outside the Diet. The public consciousness is entirely unprepared to abandon 80 years of peace. And so, I leave you with this final thought to consider. With the global order fracturing all around them and 50,000 citizens holding the line against the formidable weight of history, the ultimate question remains suspended in the air. Is the sun rising on a necessary, pragmatic new military superpower capable of defending itself in an increasingly hostile world? Or is Japan about to permanently lose its soul? The tension remains unresolved right here in May 2026. Thank you for joining me to unpack this complex reality. Watch the streets, analyze the shifting maps, and never stop questioning the forces that shape our world.